Let's face it, as much as we like to pretend that we're all Bruce Willis, if faced with real kidnappers, most of us would act by soiling ourselves, begging for our lives, and soiling ourselves some more. Since stories about people continuously peeing their pants aren't exactly unique or interesting, here are the tales of 5 real legendary hostages who not only kept their cool but managed to foil their kidnappers in awesome ways. Before we get started, remember to subscribe to the Top 10 Owl for more amazing content like this every day. Number 5. Hostage escapes from kidnappers by dragging an entire bed down the street. In January of 1986, Mohammed Tajir was walking to his home in London when he was taken hostage by 4 guys. Turns out Tajir was the brother of billionaire Mondial Tajir, the Arab ambassador of London, and the son of 2 people who were really into the name Mohammed. The kidnappers asked for $7.1 million for Tajir's return, and in the meantime chained him down by his arms and legs to the bed of a windowless room. After being kept drugged and blindfolded for 10 days, Tajir woke up one morning to find a note that promised he would be released soon, and also that they would totally kill him if he screamed for help. Tajir, still chained to the bed, obeyed his kidnappers' orders and laid there in silence. He waited for almost 2 weeks to be released. What difference did one more day make? A few hours later, Tajir said, "Okay, screw this," and just got up and walked out of the room with the bed still behind him. Completely ignoring the "we're gonna kill you if you make any noise" part of the letter, Tajir managed to drag the entire bed down the stairs, through the front door of the house, and down into the streets of South London suburbs. Tajir knocked on the door to the nearest house. The woman who lived there later said, "To my astonishment, when I opened the door, I saw a fine-looking gentleman in pajamas padlocked to a bed." Once the cops freed him from the bed, Tajir found out that his brother, one of the richest men in the world, had spent the past week talking down his ransom from $71.5 million to $3 million, which he paid the kidnappers the day before. So apparently they were being honest when they said that he would release him soon, and they risked his life for nothing. Still, at least he had the satisfaction of depriving them of a perfectly good bed. Number 4. Telling passengers to take down their hijacker right in front of them. In 2007, a commercial flight from Lithuania in North Africa to the Canary Islands was hijacked by a man who barged into the cockpit with 2 loaded handguns soon after taking off. What was his objective, you might ask? Turning the plane over to France, where he planned to request political asylum for unknown reasons. Piloting an airplane is hard enough under non-crazy conditions, so imagine having to do it with a gun pointed at your head and 71 panicking passengers behind you. As if that wasn't enough, at this point the crew informed that the pilot did not actually have enough fuel to get to France like the hijacker wanted to. As you can imagine, this posed a major problem. The pilot had to think fast. As the pilot tried to explain to the hijacker that they couldn't make it to his intended destination, he realized something. The guy didn't speak a word of French. Turning this small fact into his advantage, the pilot took the PA system and calmly informed the passengers in French that they would soon be making a rough landing, and as soon as the hijacker lost his balance from the impact, they should feel free to come into the cockpit and beat him up. As the pilot said this, the hijacker stood right next to him, assuming that he was relaying his demands and talking about normal airplane stuff. Women and children were instructed to move to the seats in the back, partly for their own safety, and partly so those who could deal the most damage were closer to the front. And then the pilot did exactly what said. Upon landing the plane, he slammed on the brakes and abruptly sped up, causing the hijacker to fall down and drop his guns. Then about 10 passengers immediately rushed in and overpowered him as crew members poured boiling hot water over his body. Eventually, after the passengers were done using him as a hacky sack, the hijacker was handed over to the Spanish authorities. Why the genius chose French above all other countries when he didn't even understand the language, we may never know. Number 3. Singer jumps out of car. If it's the 60s and you're going to kidnap a member of the Motown sensation, the Supremes, the obvious choice would be Diana Ross, since we're pretty sure that she's the only one that the average person could name. The others were replaced more often than the drummer in Spinal Tap. Kidnapper Charles Collier apparently decided that it would take way too much work and instead went for the much lesser known but awesomely named Cindy Birdsong. On December 2nd, 1969, Birdsong was opening the door to her Hollywood apartment when a crazed Collier jumped on her with a butcher knife and shoved her into the passenger seat of her car. Collier then took her on a terrifying joyride along the Long Beach freeway. Birdsong knew she had to get away from him as fast as possible, but she couldn't do much. After being forced to spend 30 minutes in the man's company, Birdsong couldn't take one more second of it and reached for his knife, cutting her hand in the process. Since this clearly wasn't working out, she went to plan B. She unlocked the car door, opened it, and jumped out of the speeding vehicle in the middle of the freeway. As a general rule, if you do that and the impact doesn't kill you, the other cars probably will. It didn't help that it was nighttime by now. Birdsong survived the fall, coming to a stop at the end of a ditch. Injured and bloodied, she got up and did the third crazy thing that she's done in less than a minute. She headed back to the freeway and started running in the opposite direction of the cars, determined to make it as hard as possible for Collier to circle back and collect her. She waved at the coming cars, but none of them stopped when they got close enough to see that it wasn't Diana Ross. Luckily, 2 highway patrolmen happened to be passing by, and they sorta have to stop in these situations. After all that, Birdsong was only treated for minor cuts and bruises. Figuring she had to be some sort of supernatural being for walking away from that, the kidnapper turned himself in only a few days later. You are not going to believe number 2. Retired Tarzan actor disarms Cuban rebels by doing the Tarzan yell. In 1958, a group of Americans staying at the Hilton Havana in Cuba were playing a golf tournament when they suddenly found themselves surrounded by rebel soldiers pointing guns at them. As you probably know, Cuba was in the middle of a bloody anti-imperialist revolution at the time, but apparently the golfers never got the memo. Obviously, the rebels didn't exactly look kindly on a bunch of wealthy capitalists who still thought of Cuba as America's playground, and began interrogating the golfers one by one, with their guns still very much pointed at the wealthy captives. What the rebels didn't know was that one of the golfers was a 54-year-old actor, Johnny Weissmuller, best known for dressing in nothing but loincloth and swinging on vines in the 30s and 40s. Weissmuller starred as Tarzan in 12 films and to this day best known actor to have played the role. When the hostile soldiers approached him, Weissmuller confidently said, "Me, Tarzan," to which the rebels responded, "Huh?" Turns out that Tarzan is pronounced completely different in Spanish and is more like Tarzan. Since they clearly weren't getting the message and for some reason still convinced that his celebrity status would save them from captivity or death, Weissmuller stood up at his full height, beat his chest with his fist, and let out the trademark Tarzan yell that he single-handedly popularized, at which point the rebels collectively cowered in fear. Seriously, starstruck, the rebels put down their guns and proceeded to freak out, yelling, "Tarzan, Tarzan, and welcome to Cuba." Apparently their anti-capitalist sentiment stopped at Hollywood movies. They not only released Weissmuller and his fellow golfers completely unharmed, but actually escorted them back to their hotel. Of course, none of that would have worked if the bad guys had been intentionally trying to capture a celebrity. And at number 1, kidnapped bus driver hulks out, saves 27 school children. Kidnapping a bus full of school children sounds like something that would only happen in the movies, because who would be horrible enough to actually do it? The answer is Frederick Wood, James Schofield, and his brother Richard Schofield. The 3 armed men stopped a school bus in Chochilla, California in 1976 and took 26 children and 1 bus driver hostage. Also, this happened in the middle of July, which means that on top of everything, these kids were being forced to go to summer school. As the kidnappers tried to figure out what to do next and how to spend the $5 million they planned on demanding for the 26 families, they forced the kids and the drivers into a moving van buried in the middle of nowhere, closing off the top with no way to get out. The bus driver knew that he had to do something drastic. Even though the kidnappers had threatened him with guns, bus driver Ed Ray wasn't impressed. He had more pressing matters on his mind, and he wasn't going to let being buried in some hole several miles away from nowhere stop him from doing that. Ray looked around. The only thing that he had to work with as a means of escape was a pile of mattresses inside the cramped van. Ray and some of the older kids stacked the mattresses up to reach the top, only to find the entrance blocked by a few hundred pounds of car batteries the kidnappers had put as extra insurance. Through sheer force of will, the 55-year-old driver managed to lift off the batteries while balancing himself on an unstable pile of 14 mattresses, then helped the kids exit their underground prison one by one as he guided them to safety. Soon the kids were back with their parents, and by then the kidnappers had realized what happened and were long gone. That's when Ed Ray, the most overqualified school bus driver, stepped in again. The police were able to use hypnosis, which allowed Ray to remember the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle. With this information, the authorities were able to put those scumbags in jail. What would you do if this happened to you? Let us know down in the comments and subscribe to Top 10 Owl if you think that you could escape from being kidnapped.